Welcome back to the Revolution of Being podcast. So, today we're going to jump on into a topic that is near and dear to our heart, which is identity. So, we live in a culture where we are just inundated with all these different identifying things. And especially in America, where we have, sorry, but a very consumeristic culture. We identify with our belongings, we identify with the community with which we live, we identify with the people we hang around with, and, the job title we hold. And so today we really want to break down, like, who are we to the core? And that's something that I've personally been going through the last few months, is like, who am I outside of social media influence, outside of the title of, the career path I'm on. And so we want to kind of help you cut through the noise of your own journey to really help get back to the center of who we are as beings, because we can identify, of course, with these external things surrounding us, but that's not really who we are authentically, kind of at the center of our hearts. And so, to jump off into this, Jess, I know you work with this when you're working with your own clients as well, as far as kind of helping them parse out the noise and helping them discover their voice again in a sea of a lot of people who have a lot of things to say. And so often we get caught up in comparisonitis and looking at others in our industry or in the world that we kind of feel like we should be not competing with, but keeping up with, essentially, like how to do this life experience in the right way. And there is no right way, but we get really caught up in everything we're exposed to. So I'd love to hear your opinion, kind of in your experience with the identity journey you maybe bring your clients through, or kind of what you notice as well.
Yeah. I think it impacts everything. That's my belief, and that's why it's really hard. I wear the hat of like a business coach, business consultant, but at the end of the day, we really don't get anywhere until we get to the human level. So it all kind of circles back to the identity, and it's not so much what other people think we are, it's really how we're identifying with ourselves. And there's a lot of mixed messages in the world about that. As you said, social media, consumerism, do I drive a Lexus or do I drive a Toyota? I mean, we start to become all the identities of all the things we're surrounded with. And that's what we have to break the barriers on. And they go a little bit further, even into our belief system. Like a great example in my career field is when I work with leaders. I hear people say, I'm a bad leader. They literally say that I am, and
Mhm.
they fill in the blank. It's easy to do. We've been taught this language over, the course of our life. And the English language, it's really interesting because other languages don't so much do that first person identification, like the I am statements. Um, they like, I can't remember what languages it is, but like if you were to walk by a table and knock a vase down, in the English language, you would say, I broke the vase. But in other languages, it would be the vase fell down and broke. It's different. We just bring this identification into us constantly through everything that's around us. So, why is it important though? If we are constantly identifying with everything we're surrounded by, do why are we not confused? We should be confused. We should be really, really confused about who we are. And I think that's number one problem. We just have a lot of people confused about who they are. Number two, it's very confusing to other people. And I feel like, especially in like leadership or parenting or relationships, we all naturally want to understand who each other are because it helps the pattern recognition. There's a familiarity and a predictability. And when we have somebody who's one way over here and then another way over here, it can leave the other person feeling disoriented. In business, I run into this a lot where, leaders show up in this capacity and then the next day they flip a switch and they're this capacity because they're constantly trying to figure out how do they identify themselves as a leader. And I think in parent child relationships, this is no different. So we have kind of a crisis of identification in the world. And I had heard this great saying in a meditation, actually. I've had it said to me so many times now that I'm like, oh, it's really, really good. We are not a body with a soul. We are a soul with a body. And within that, it's fair to learn how to really identify what that is, because that is what we are. And we could be many things, but a lot of times it's I'm a mom, I am Angie, I am a business owner, I am. So I want to talk about how do we start to unravel that. And I would love to know, you work with people in their subconscious, and I think a lot of it starts there. I would assume you would agree with that. Um,
Absolutely.
so I'd like to know, like, how do you start to address that? Because you're the
Yeah.
expert in this part.
So, I think it starts by even rewinding back to when we first enter this planet. And to your point, I had a coach say years ago, or rather ask the question, like, who are you? And of course, we all start naming our titles. I'm a mom, I'm a nurse, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm a wife, I'm a whatever. And he kept challenging us. And I'm like, well, what's the right answer? Like these are all like who I am. And it was to your point, like I am a soul on this planet having a human experience. That's the essence of who all of us are. And it really kind of brought back down just to the bare bones of us as these beings here, and yet we identify with all these externals that really aren't ours. And so to really properly address this, it starts at birth. We come into this planet, we are given a name, we are given a social security card, we are given all these identifying things saying you are Angela Marie, so and so, born in this town, this state, this whatever. And then, we begin to, even our parents, dressing us in a certain way, identifying with the toys we want to play with. And, you and I said, like when we were little, we were tomboys, we kind of busted out of the mold of what we should be as little girls. We were like, I don't like that. I don't want to wear dresses. I want to wear what I want. And I had parents that would allow that. I was a very sensitive, like sensory sensitive kid. And I didn't like the traditional, but I also knew like, okay, I'm a girl, and here's kind of my role. I saw my mom in her role, my dad in his, and that started to help me, maybe not in a good way, identify what, women's roles are, right? As a woman, what my roles were. Um, but as a child in that dynamic, also what my roles were, right? So I was already taking identities of, I'm a sister, I have a brother with special needs. So, I've got this, and this. And even when I was little, that I am sensitive, I am anxious, I am, an introvert and very nervous around people. I identified with all of those characteristics. And so when I work with clients, it really is, bringing them back to those identifiers, those beliefs, and helping them, first of all, begin to understand where did those come from? Because they weren't yours. None of those things that we learn about ourselves are really ours to take on, but we do because we don't know better. And when we're little, our brains are like little sponges, just absorbing everything about the world, which does help keep us safe, right? Like everything that we're taking in is feedback. It's feedback, hey, don't do that again. That's dangerous. Or, hey, that was really safe. Let's do that more, or that was fun. So we're constantly getting feedback as little kids. And that begins to cement in our brains around the age 8, 9, where we then have this belief set about the world, but also our place in it, right? So I saw, growing up, parents that were very, um, uh, I'll just say a mother who was very insecure, very anxious, very nervous, very all these things. And I, growing up, had very similar characteristics because that's what I saw as to how to be safe in this world. And so I, from a very little age, would identify. If you would have asked me, I was anxious. I was a very, very nervous child. And, you and I have talked about this. I had all these root chakra issues as a very little kid that in hindsight makes so much sense because I didn't feel safe in the world. Because to me, based on the living I had, the world was a very unsafe place and it was to be feared. And you had to look out, everywhere. And I remember, my dad would always sit in restaurants where his back would face like the back of the restaurant so he could see everything in front of him. He didn't want to ever be cornered where he couldn't see. And I unconsciously still do that. Like I will position myself so I can kind of have this expansive view. And so, when we start to kind of look at those things, it's like, well, that's not my belief. That's not, is the world really a scary place? Well, no, like it can be, of course, but has my lived experience validated that? No, not at all. In fact, like my lived experience is the exact opposite. Like, of course, there are things that happen, but there aren't threats lurking around every corner. So, that's a big part of the identification of things. And I always correct clients too when they're like, oh, I'm so anxious. I just can't stop this. This is just who I am. It's like, no, 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 no. That's a program. All of this is programming, or I can just never make enough money. I can't do this right. I just suck at texting. I suck at this, that, and the other. It's like, no, 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 no. Stop making that yours. That doesn't have to be the way that you show up in this world. And then it becomes, when people begin to understand, I think the biggest eye opener is understanding like that was never yours to identify with or carry. Because when you realize that that's optional, you have the possibility to change it. And to people that maybe aren't at that kind of level of awareness yet, that might sound crazy. Like, what are you talking about? This is optional. But it is, just like our thoughts are optional. We have the opportunity to change our identity with regards to how we show up every single day. I used to feel very unworthy of a lot of things, and again, very insecure. And I don't feel that way at all anymore. I have my moments, of course, as humans, we do when we're stretching our comfort zone, but I don't, because I've done a lot of reprogramming of those and really challenging them. And I think the biggest way to challenge them, if you're not working with a coach, is just to begin to look at the characteristics of how you show up. And then if they're great ones, hell yes, keep that. If they're ones that put you in positions that don't make you feel good, the chronic people pleasing, the hypochondriac, the over anxious personality, you can challenge those and begin to rewire those things. As you guys know, my favorite modality is hypnosis. It's the fastest way to rewire those beliefs. But for a lot of us that are analytical, we want to understand where they come from, because when we do, then we begin to have compassion for that little girl or that little boy who went through those experiences and took on those identities. And so, you begin to, on the journey of healing and evolution, is begin to just question all those things. Is it absolutely true that, I need to remain anxious the rest of my life? And you might say, yeah, that's how I've always been. But you might look at other people and say, but they're not anxious. So does that mean I have to be? Or that person makes a lot of money. Does that mean I have to be poor the rest of my life? No. Like, let other people be the living example of what is possible versus the limitations that we so often fight for unknowingly. And so, again, kind of, it really ties back to our childhood oftentimes, or big emotional events that happen to us that instill a belief set, because that is how we create neurological wiring, is also heavy emotional experiences or authority figures. A doctor says something to you about your weight or about whatever when you were a child, so you carry that identity the rest of your life, that I'm always going to be overweight or whatever. And so it's a process of deep introspection, really. And it doesn't, you and I know this process doesn't end. It's a continual challenging of our beliefs, challenging of our thoughts. Is it absolutely true that blank in every situation? Is it absolutely true that I suck at being a leader? No, I just made some decisions that didn't super end great. But you know what? I learned a lot. And that was a conversation I had with a dear friend yesterday. Last year was a massive year of learning for me. A lot of us, I think, too, 2024 was a really hard year. And in that, I hit a few walls and had a couple experiences that did not feel great. But man, did I learn. And I'm so grateful for that, because we don't necessarily learn when things are good and easy. But those experiences helped me reflect on my own journey, my own bias, my own beliefs, to begin to recognize them and repatter them. So, it kind of goes into, once you start to understand those things, right, you begin to recognize, like, oh, I always say, and I love your point, I am. What do you say after I am? So begin to question that. Catch yourself. Like, I am always late. Okay. Does it have to be your reality? Can you wake up a little bit earlier? Can you set your time a little bit differently? Yeah, for sure. Well, I have kids. Okay, so do I. A lot of people do, and they're not late. So it's kind of like, okay, what are you going to fight for again? So you begin to just notice. Like, that's the first step, is just to notice
Yeah.
where these things are coming in. And it's going to be the ones that are uncomfortable. Those are the ones you want to challenge. The things that are going well, that aren't causing you distress, that aren't interfering with your relationships, that aren't inhibiting you, that's not maybe the best place to kind of go. But it is the ones that impact your life in not so great ways that you want to start to challenge, and then just tease apart them, journal them out, and begin to say, how do I want to show up? I want to be calm. I want to be able to walk into a meeting and feel level headed, clear minded, and then use hypnosis, use some kind of affirmations or some kind of repetitive process to really begin to change that identity, because that is the essence of hypnosis work that I do anyways, is identity work. It's changing those aspects that aren't serving you to a more elevated version of yourself. And that's, I think, where society, so often we feel disempowered, because we don't know that we're able to change. We don't necessarily know that we have the power to reclaim our life and do what we choose, to heal, to use our mind, to do all these amazing things. So I
Yeah.
digress. I'll get off my little podium. I'm sure you have a lot to add with your own lived experience and what you see. So I'd love to hear more from you as well.
Yeah. I look at the whole thing and just say our life can be like Groundhog's Day. If you've never seen the movie where you wake up, you're kind of living the same scene over and over again. It's a it's February right now, so I guess it's a good movie to talk about, but every day this person wakes up at the same time to the same song on the radio, and at first he just kind of goes through the motions. He goes through the same motions every day. He makes the same decisions. He plays the same character. He has the same outcomes. He's kind of a guy that a lot of people don't really have any personal like for because he's a little bit of a Scrooge, kind of self-centered, whatever. And he keeps making these same decisions. But over time, over a lapse of a long time that he keeps reliving the same day, he starts to play with it a little bit. And he starts to develop exactly what you just talked about. Like he's peeling back layers of himself and he's making these small adjustments in what he does. And the storyline starts to change. And he starts to figure out like he wasn't this, I think he was a news anchor. So he wasn't the personification of this news anchor anymore. Like he wasn't this thing. He was this person who enjoyed laughing and eating, and he started to enjoy the company of another person, and there were just all these things. And one day it just broke. The daily pattern broke and he was in a new existence. It's kind of profound, way ahead of its time. But that's how this is. This is this is a really long journey, and we lie to ourselves all the time with these identifications, and that's not because we're bad people. That's not because we love misery. We are just, like you said, programmed. We are wired for the familiar. The patterns are familiar, therefore our brain says that's safe. We can continue doing this because we already know the outcome. It's when we get into the unknown, which is where we start to interrupt the pattern, which you like to talk about that we start to feel uneasy, and we start to go, well, I've always had anxiety. I'm an anxious person. And then somebody says, well, is that who you want to be? And they challenge it and almost tell you you have a choice, and that probably triggers you.
Mm-hmm.
It triggered me. Why
Yeah.
wouldn't it trigger anybody who has made that their identity?
Right.
Right? They have all the proof to back it up, and that is the other challenge, is that life will continue to give you what you've claimed.
Right.
So what you claim is what repeats. So it's complicated to break the pattern against this timeline of evidence that you are. But when you realize it's really like a chicken and an egg scenario, it puts the onus back on you. And that's a tough pill to swallow.
Well,
And
it is. It
it's a
comes down to
journey.
radical. Well, yeah, and radical responsibility and accountability, and that's
Yeah.
something that we're not great at in this country. We as a society are great at passing the buck, and we want the quick fix, we want the pill, we want the immediate solution, we want to Amazon Prime everything. That is not how transformation goes. And when it comes to breaking patterns, you are absolutely correct. And to your point, people will go into cognitive dissonance, meaning like the walls go up, they kind of shut down and go into like, I can't even fathom that this isn't possible. And as someone who struggled with anxiety for many, 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 many years, to think of not having it, I couldn't even fathom. I'm like, what is that like? What is, you just wake up and feel normal? Like, what is normal? I just assumed anxiety was normal. And until I started to challenge that belief. And what I will say is and you nailed this, when you begin to challenge those beliefs, it's uncomfortable. And oftentimes what you're challenging, whether it's anxiety, food cravings, addictions, whatever, that voice will get louder. The reason being is that part of your identity believes very much so that it's critical for your survival. right? That reptilian mind comes out, the habit brain starts just yelling at you, like, you need to eat that food, that ice cream, or you're going to die. Now, that's not the words you're hearing, but that's the feeling in your body. Is such an intense emotional experience. And the best way out of that is to continue to shift your attention to something else, whether it's going for a walk, calling a friend, doing something that totally takes your mind off of whatever is trying to suck you back into
And
that. And
why? Why? It's because
right.
there's a scientific reason for it. And I
Mhm.
think people need to have an understanding of it to really fully appreciate the process. You have neurological pathways that have formed. They started forming when you were little. Some of them have stayed, some of them have changed, but all these pathways, they are wired. Your brain is like this brilliant computer system. And so we have the pathways, and that is the easiest route. That
Mhm.
is our energy saving system. And when you think you're just stuck, I've felt that. I know you felt that. Like, I'm just stuck. Like, I am stuck in this. I'm never going to wake up and feel differently. It's because those neural pathways are so established.
Mhm.
So, to what you're saying, when we interrupt the pattern, we disrupt that circuit.
Yeah.
And this gives us the opportunity to form new neurological pathways. But when I'm teaching somebody in a business setting, when I'm helping them build their business and I'm trying to encourage mentorship, it's the same thing. It's learn it, learn what it is, and then exercise it, because it's the doing, it's the motor, the physical act of writing, everything, and walking the path that starts to bond those neurological connections. So you have to be willing to sit in the discomfort. And some of it's really hard. I've broken away from very toxic relationships with people I love. And let me tell you, the cognitive dissonance there is so real. And it's like, you cause me so much pain, and yet I still keep coming back to you. That's the idea. That's the trauma bond. That's the same thing. So when you can look at it and go, I see what that is. Okay, I love you, but you're a familiar pattern. You're a familiar pattern. So in order to make that not familiar, because I don't want to keep reliving the day I don't like, I've actually got to allow this tremendous discomfort, pain, all the things, and start doing something different. And you're walking into the abyss. It is uncomfortable. It is unknown. This feels like the void calling you, but that's what you're talking about. And I think understanding that is what can give you the resilience to stay there if you really, really want to get to this different
And
place.
that is, and thank you for circling into that further, because that is so valuable. And this process takes time. When I was breaking the patterns of anxiety, it was 6, 9 months plus of diligent work, and I was using hypnosis and coaching. Okay, this is not a fast process. When you have something ingrained in you that you've patterned for 20, 30 plus years, it takes time. There are no quick fixes to any of these things. And it's that simple commitment to, when you notice those feelings arise, noticing the thoughts arise, the addictions, the whatever it is, that you're consistently interrupting the pattern. And it gets easier. I would say the first few weeks of this process are not super easy because those patterns are so hardwired. Um, but it does get easier in time. And that's what I tell my clients. If I'm working with clients who, overuse alcohol or cigarette smoke or some kind of a physical addiction, it's the same process as it is for a psycho-emotional. Is, you're going to reach for the drink. No, you're not. You're going to pattern interrupt it. You're going to stop and think about it, make it a conscious thing, because it's very unconscious oftentimes with these patterns. It's always fully addiction, but it's also habituated. So when you pattern interrupt that, go for a walk, do something else, get yourself out of the environment that keeps you in those experiences. The next time it gets just a little easier, and then a little easier, and then a little easier. And within that as well, kind of more specifically in the realm of addiction or trauma, when you have a clear mind and enough distance, then you can actually go in and do that deep healing work and understand why you had the struggles you had in the first place. We've talked about this too. Those that, have or have suffered from narcissistic relationships, you get to go do the deep work of why in the first place were you attracted to that? What unconsciously, right? No one ever gets into these things consciously because it's fun. So I just want to be clear that I'm not going to ever shame somebody for any of these things. But there's a reason, that you felt really loved by this person who's love bombing you and throwing all this stuff at you, or that the after work drink became an every night pattern. What are you running from? What are you trying to fill within? Because it's always an emptiness. And I'm a really big believer, and this is very controversial, but I'm going to say it, that when you heal the trauma, the addiction goes away. You don't have that need. And I know people, might have me on a, have me guillotined for saying that because people really believe it's a disease. And I will say there are absolutely genetic components to addictions. Yes. And it goes into epigenetics and nature nurture. But I ultimately believe, having dealt with my own very significant struggles over the years, that when I healed the traumas, I was able to release a lot of those things, a lot of the tendencies that I've had. And I also know my mind. I dopamine seek because I have neurodivergency, and that's how I am. So I'm mindful of different things and I'm just more aware, but I don't have the addictive nature I did because I was able to actually reflect on the reasons why I fell into those patterns in the first place. And, I was talking with someone recently who's in the throes of their own struggles, and um, when you have the peace of mind or the clarity from the substance, the addiction, the anxiety, whatever, and you can kind of eagle eye view it, you can look at things differently and you can see different vantage points and perspectives. But also, it's never as bad or as scary as you expect to reflect on those things. It's not. And in fact, again, self compassion comes up huge, that those tools, those things you got caught up in, whether it was anxiety, difficult relationships, addictions, whatever, like those served a purpose to help you survive something, because you were in a really difficult situation. Maybe it was a traumatic childhood and you saw your parents drink. So that's what you adopted, or you were abused. And so you became a parent who yelled a lot. Like that's a survival tactic. So none of this is ever meant to shame, but it is our responsibility to heal it. You can't change what happened to you as a child. That's not your fault. But what you do have control over and what is your responsibility is the healing that takes place now. And again, the identity shift, right? Like some of the most amazing people that you and I know have been to hell and back and have alchemized that and transcended it and done something amazing with those traumas. And again, you don't have to identify with those things. And I really, I talk often with my clients about, again, this is something that's controversial, but the AA model. I struggle with that because I'm not Angie the alcoholic. I'm Angie, someone who doesn't drink. Like I just choose not to, right? So if I'm going to continue to struggle with, or rather say I'm an alcoholic every day, I'm going to be battling between, do I have a drink? Don't I have a drink? Do I? Don't I? I'm not an alcoholic. I had trauma and I had maladaptive coping, and that was one of them. And I've transcended that. So I just don't drink. So I know, and that's a great model. So I'm not going to say it's a bad thing, but I really, anything that follows I am is who you are.
That's right.
And I don't want that attached to me. That feels like a bag of stones I'm carrying everywhere I go, and that's not who I am anymore. I'm a whole different person than I was even a few years ago. Um, so I think, be mindful and be mindful of the people that you're around, right? Because you vibe with your tribe, the people you're only, as good as the sum of the parts you are with. And so if you're in really difficult situations, find yourself in different rooms, find yourself around people who you aspire to be more like, or who, exude the qualities that you want to begin to identify with, because that will raise you up energetically, vibrationally, with your confidence and everything. And right, your imposter syndrome might kick the hell up. That's another area with which you get to move through the discomfort and say, you know what, I deserve to be here. And I bet you, more than anything, the majority of those people in those rooms have similar stories, have their own traumas, their own challenges. We don't all wear it on our sleeves.
Yeah.
But when you have those deep conversations, you begin to understand we are so much more alike than we're not. And everybody's doing the best they can. We really, really are. But again, I think our intention and our movement with the Revolution of Being podcast is raising consciousness. And a big part of that is looking at ourselves and doing that inner work, because it does reflect outward. So if we want to change the world, we have to start within ourselves. And that's the most powerful thing that we can do, especially right now, with identity politics and all these things happening. There's so much noise. And again, it's like, who are you to the core? Like, just get quiet with that, meditate on it, pray on it, whatever you got to do. And what do I want for my life? If
Right.
anything were possible, what do I want? How do I want to show up? And then
Yep.
begin to take those little steps.
Yeah. An exercise I like to do with my own clients, I'm going to pay it forward here and just share it with everyone, is today, just where you're at today. Don't pick it apart too much, just evaluate it. Write down, who am I identifying as today? Kind of think back, like, how have I identified who I am? Or maybe am I taking on the identification other people have given to me? Have I adopted that? Because like you said, we are the sum of those that were around. And just kind of like draw that out, write that out. Give it a place. I like a time capsule. And in that time capsule, write out also, how you're feeling today. What are you struggling with? Just really stamp today on that. And then write how you would rather be identified. What's an identity that you'd rather have? Who is that person? What do they do? How do they show up? Even maybe like how much money do they make? What are their friends like? This is your story. Write it all out and make it whatever you want, but then flag your calendar for like 6 months, a year from now. Everybody has, some people like the short term. Some people are like, I want to see what my life is like in a year. I do this annually. And just set a date to revisit that. And the the gap between who you are today and who you want to be is where the work is. So just go, what can I do every day? It might just be getting up a half hour earlier, um, adopting some habit. Maybe it's going to the gym, or maybe it's reading, maybe you map out like, these are the books I want to read. I'm going to read one book a month. Whatever it is, make a decision to make a commitment to yourself. And really make the goal like, I want to be the person that I am, like really am. I want to discover who that is. What am I? Who am I? And leave it open. And then in that 6 months, in that year, after doing all the things, maybe they're little, maybe they're big, revisit that. Because sometimes we lose sight of the transformation. If you go on a weight loss journey or something like that, every day there's like maybe no results showing, or maybe just small ones. It's not until you go look at pictures from the past or people haven't seen you in a while. That's kind of the idea. So sometimes we lose sight of how far we've come, and we lose sight because this is an onion and every layer exposes another. So there is no end result that's like, this is it. It's just layers. And so develop the ability to find the success in getting to a new layer versus perfection, or thinking that this is what a healed person or a whole person looks like. So just set your timeline, time capsule it, identify it, and then celebrate your wins.
That's so
Yeah.
huge. And, I love that you have the book Atomic Habits behind you, because that is also a fantastic resource for people just starting on a transformational journey, because they talk about habit stacking. So often we want to have this massive identity change, but what people miss is that this stuff takes time. And, when I talk with people and they're, really impressed with my journey, I'm like, this was a 5-year intentional journey. 5 years of intention. Before that, I was asleep and had no awareness of any of these possibilities. So the person I am today is a result of 5 years of intentional choice making. And it was not a linear journey at all. There were, mountains to climb, and then I fell off a few, and then I was back up. And so, habit stacking is huge, to really just micro change these little things that are sustainable until they become habits. And they're just a part of who you are, right? Like, you and I are active women. We work out, we do yoga, we do all these other things. And that's just who we are. It's not a struggle to get out of bed and do the stuff. It's just what we do. It's as simple as, I don't have to think about brushing my teeth. I just throw my gym clothes on, go work out, and that's that. So it can be that easy, but it's about habituating it, and There have been times where I've been sick or I've kind of fallen off the workout wagon because it's just been a week. And I'm just like, I don't really want to right now. But you know what? It's so much easier to pick those habits back up because it's been a habit I've had now for nearly 20 years with consistency. And it's just who I am. I'm just someone who does what I do. And so this is the journey of transformation. And, as you mentioned, like writing that down, revisiting the goals so they are top of mind is so important because I think a lot of times people are like, oh, do your vision board and come back and see what happened. It's like, well, no, you have to be consistently looking at that, focusing on one thing you want to do, or maybe one or two little things, and then really just kind of letting the momentum guide you and taking inspired action because nothing changes until something changes. And so, I have people that consulted with me 3 years ago for hypnotherapy who are still tire spinning and they're still stuck in the same place. And I'm not faulting them because I was that person. But nothing changes until you take accountability for your life and you decide that you want differently. No one is going to do that for you. There's not going to be a magic wand that drops out of the sky that's like, now's your time. Like, here we go. We're going to upgrade your life. Like, if you want something, it's up to you to do it. And the other thing I will say too is, we didn't talk about this, but this is really valuable because I also talk with my clients about this, is we also can get caught in what's called secondary gain, meaning that anxiety you have is actually serving a purpose that's giving you some kind of positive feedback loop. Oh, well, when I'm really anxious, my husband just takes care of everything in the house and I don't have to work. I don't have to do anything. Or, me being overweight allows me to not have to actually like get up and show my face and do the things I really want to do because I'm not worthy. So it can keep you stuck in patterns unconsciously because there's actually another payoff you're getting. And I've seen that with hypnotherapy. People, I shouldn't say people, individuals with chronic illness. And I've been that girl. I've had autoimmunity and all of that. And there's an unconscious gain that you get of I don't have to work as hard now because when I'm this sick, everyone takes care of stuff for me and they feel bad for me. And that feels really nice to have attention because I never had attention. And no one does this consciously. I just want to acknowledge like this is not going to be the shame game, the blame game, nothing. But if you have patterns that are repeating that you're feeling caught up in, it's a little hard to parse the unconscious secondary gain. I have a process with hypnotherapy that can help get right there. Consciously trying to find it is a little bit challenging, but there's a really great book. I forget who the author is, but it's called The Mountain Is You. And it's about how we get into self-sabotage with reaching our goals, whether it's health related, business, finance, whatever, and how we just get caught in these patterns that keep us stuck. And self-sabotage is a protective mechanism, but sometimes there are these other patterns that give us an unconscious benefit. And so you want to look at that too, because sometimes there are reasons we stay stuck in patterns that are even deeper than the actual source. So that's just something that could be a whole nother episode itself on, but we're not going to go fully into that, but just know that that exists as well. And it's something to just kind of be like, is there something else that is a benefit of this experience right now?
Yeah.
And it's usually something around attention. People can be more attention. I don't have to do something I don't want to do. I don't want to be seen. I'm too nervous to whatever. This gives me an excuse to not do the stuff I'd like to do or I should do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a cycle and it's a pattern, and you have to really make the decision. It's all
Mhm,
about your decision. Like, do you want it or do you not?
mhm.
And, there's no right or wrong answer there. This is your journey. This will be
Yeah.
your ending. And so when it comes down to that, you're your only savior, and you better make your decision based upon what you really want to have happen at the end. Nobody's coming to rescue you from it. So decide who you want to be. I love this episode. Obviously, I think it's kind of the cure for the world's problems, in my opinion, is, unwinding from the programming. And I'm sure we're going to talk more about this in the future. So, with that, I want to send you off to time capsule who you want to be, and we'll catch you next time.
See you later.